Hello everybody, all this month I have been living with this lovely Audi R8 rear wheel drive, and in today's video we're going to be answering one of the philosophical questions surrounding supercar ownership, which is, can you really use one every day? I'm sure there's quite a few people out there who could potentially afford a car like this, but for many reasons, which might not all be financial, they would have to use it a lot more often than you typically would. The R8 is often cited as an example of the usable, everyday supercar, and I think in some ways it very much matches that description, but in others I would also say that it does fall some way short. So in this video we're going to be looking at the why you might, the why you might not, and whether it really can be done. A big thank you to today's sponsor, BOTB, the dream car company. They've recently doubled the number of prizes they're giving out. Much of the lineup has also received a boost, with £50,000 cash coming in the back of some very exciting cars. For Audi fans, you could win an R8 V10 for £4, or for something a little bit different, how about an ABD modified Q8 for £3? They've even got a classic Quattro 20 valve up for grabs at just £2.15 a go. To enter, you must be 17 or over, and you'll find full details along with all T's and C's on their website, which you can reach through the link in the description down below. Good luck. If you want the ultra short version, yes, of course you can. You can drive a supercar every single day. But then I know people who have daily driven a Caterham or a Lotus Elise Series 1. These are cars that I really wouldn't want to daily drive. So in order to perhaps better understand the question and therefore its relevance to you, let's turn it on its head. Let's ask, why is it that driving a supercar every single day might seem like something that you shouldn't be able to do? I think a lot of people would say that it's simply too expensive to do. Now, you're certainly going to depreciate your supercar quite a bit by putting miles on it, but if you're sensible and you buy a used example, or indeed if you have a finance agreement, that isn't going to make a massive difference to your outgoings. The same, I think, goes for fuel and insurance. No, these are not cheap cars to do thousands and thousands of miles in. In fact, this exact example, I've done about 2,000 miles, and I've averaged in that time about 20 to the gallon. I'm sure to many of you that's going to sound like a horrific figure, but the truth is there are many vehicles out there that'll do pretty much the same, and they are nowhere near as showy, flashy, or outright quick. Just the other day I did a review of a young chap's Ford Focus ST Mark II, and that was getting roughly the same MPG over his lifetime average, so it's not as outrageously impossible as you might think. The same goes for insurance. Yeah, supercar insurance isn't really that cheap, at least not compared to, say, an ordinary humdrum hatchback. But if you compare it with something, say, like a fruity 911, they needn't be that expensive. My buddy Anthony from Sports and Touring paid an extra £130 to add his Audi R8 GT to his policy for 6 months. Now, he's not using that car daily, but that gives you an idea that sometimes it can actually be very affordable, particularly if you are slightly older, you've been very careful, you don't have too many points or claims or that sort of stuff. Insurance on these things needn't be crippling. Alongside cost, practicality is probably the biggest thing that people will cite against using a supercar every single day, and in that regard they are absolutely right. Pretty much all vehicles that one might accurately call a supercar are gonna be two-seaters, so if you regularly need to carry 4 people around, well, you're gonna need something else. Boot space can also be quite limited, and that's one area where the R8 really does fall down, because it doesn't have a lot of it. You'd think that an Audi would be decent and practical and have lots of space, but actually, no. That's one area where this car's shared Lamborghini platform really does show through. Even in this rear-wheel drive variant, the space up front is very stingy. In fact, it's no different at all to the all-wheel drive version, and if you're a 911 owner, that'll probably come as a bit of a shock. It's junctions like this one here where supercars really can be quite difficult. Again, they're not really unique in that regard. I could name you any number of £1,000 cars which have equally poor visibility when it comes to certain junctions. The R8 is not brilliant in terms of rear visibility, but it's not something you can't live with at all. It's definitely workable. This is also a pretty easy car to park. You've got sensors both front and rear, and you've also got a reversing camera, which is very clear and easy to use. That means you haven't got any excuses when it comes to getting it into a parking space. Getting out of the car, however, isn't quite so easy. These doors are pretty big and wide. Although you can roll the window down and then shut it on the key, if you do have a tight parking space at work, do prepare to get your car dented or to dent somebody else's, because at some point it's probably going to happen. You'll also find people are often quite inconsiderate when it comes to parking near a car like this. They will leave you all of no room at all, and it's rather frustrating. A lot of people seem to be very worried that their car's going to get dented or scratched or keyed when they own it, and seriously, I don't think that's very likely, unless you happen to be taking a car like this to an area that is really rather suspect. I doubt much is actually going to happen to your car on purpose. In fact, nearly every single time that I've known somebody have their car keyed, it's been either about the person who owns the car or simply a random act of vandalism, and it hasn't often been somebody just venting their frustration at the bourgeoisie. You may have noticed for the early portion of this review, I have been driving this car in fully automatic mode, and it is indeed excellent at being just a normal, easy car to drive. In fact, this really isn't any more daunting to actually move around than any other Audi. They look scary sometimes, supercars, and they look intimidating, and I know a lot of people that would flat out refuse to drive a car like this, but would happily have a go in something, say, like a Ferrari California, just because it looks a bit friendlier. The truth is that something like this, or a McLaren, actually is perhaps a little easier to pilot than, say, a California or Portofino, but that's public perception for you. A lot of people don't like the fact that they are low to the ground, and of course in supercars that's where you're always going to be. I love it. I think it's great. I think it's an inherent part of the experience, but hey, that's just people. Old school supercars, I can certainly understand why a lot of people wouldn't want to use them on a daily basis, because they were fragile old things sometimes. They had a tendency to break, and they would be expensive to maintain even if they didn't. But with modern cars, there's simply no reason for that to be the case. A Ferrari will give you 7 years free servicing with any new car, and they really do mean that. There aren't any mileage limitations attached to it. You just get 7 years free servicing for your car. Apparently there's a gentleman in Germany, has an F12, does 50,000 kilometers a year in it, and he turns up twice a year for his free service, no questions asked. You even get 4 years of warranty with any new Ferrari, and if you want to buy a car used, you can often get that warranty extended too. That's not just a Ferrari thing. You can get it with Audi, you get it with McLaren, you get it with Porsche. Yes, there's varying prices there, and I touched on this in my other video about whether you need to be a millionaire to own a supercar or not. But you don't really need to panic about whether they're going to bankrupt you like you perhaps used to. Routine servicing and maintenance on these things has been made far, far cheaper, because simply manufacturers want you to be able to drive the cars. It's better for the cars, if nothing else. This, as mentioned earlier, is the rear-wheel drive variant of the R8. Most of them out there are quattro cars, and that means that actually if conditions aren't perfect, they are far less scary and intimidating than a lot of other supercars. Particularly your sort of Ferraris and stuff from 20 years ago, they could be a little bit entertaining when conditions weren't perfect. And I'm sure you've all heard horror stories of a chap who went out and wasn't even being silly, and then all of a sudden he was dead. You just don't need to worry about that anymore. In fact, even things like the McLaren 720S, that's over 700 horsepower, no matter how you count it, two-wheel drive, and that thing's really seriously planted. It's a very, very capable car, and very entertaining without being scary. It's only really if you want to be a proper idiot that you're going to get yourself in trouble in a car like that. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people out there who say that that means the supercar has been ruined, that putting all these systems in to stop people killing themselves is a terrible, terrible thing. We should just let nature run its course. But I will be one of the first to say that there are many situations where you really would appreciate a little bit of help from the car, no matter what your level of driver skill. There's always that unseen nasty on the road, perhaps that little patch of ice you didn't spot, or that bit of diesel that a truck has helpfully left for you at a roundabout. There's all sorts of things, and when you're really not going hell for leather, you may not be concentrating perhaps as much as everyone expects you to. That's not to say you shouldn't have your wits about you at all time when you are driving a supercar. One of the problems is that you'll find other road users don't perhaps pay as much attention to what they're doing as they normally would, because they're too busy looking at you. I understand completely now why people would want a Ferrari, an Audi R8, a Lamborghini in something like a dull grey. I totally and completely get it. I never used to, and I wouldn't have a car of my own in one of those shades, but I do understand the desire and the interest to have something that's very exciting and sexy, but in a more subdued colour scheme. In the past, the dimensions of a supercar have also presented quite a few issues to potential owners. A lot of people will say that they're just too low to enjoy, but actually being low isn't really the problem. It's more about the front and rear overhangs and the wheelbase in the middle. This car is not available with front lift. Many others though, Ferrari, McLaren, Lamborghini, are. And if there's even the tiniest chance you're going to have to go anywhere near a multi-storey, I would call that an absolutely essential option. This is something you didn't used to get years ago, and the idea of going over even a simple speed hump in an old supercar is quite a terrifying one. But now, it doesn't really need to be the issue that it was. Again though, I do put a caveat on that, because there are still quite a few vicious car parks out there with very, very unforgiving approaches, and I wouldn't want to take a lot of cars through them. However, that being said, most people have a lot more of a routine than I do, and so they'll know whether their route to work is actually something they could use a supercar on day to day or not. The biggest and most difficult question to answer with regards to driving a supercar is not could you drive it every day, because I believe for the vast majority of them you certainly can. The question is, do you want to? I don't think really a car like this would ask too many compromises of a person. Alright, it's not the most comfortable, it's not the plushest, certainly not for the money. However, does it take away something from the experience of a car like this? Does it take away from its specialness if you get to drive it every single day? I think that it does. Many a time I've had a car which has been something special, perhaps not a supercar, but something remarkable. My Lotus Evora, for example. And I used that car a lot. In fact, at many points in time, it was my daily. And you start to wonder, actually, is it that good at steering? Is it that quick? Is it that special? And then the best thing you can do is to just stop. Go drive something else for a couple of weeks, if you can. Because when you get back in that car, if it really is as good as you think it is, you'll be reminded almost instantly of its brilliance. I've often said for a sports car, there's no better remap you can get than that in your mind. Stop driving your own car for a couple of weeks, replace it with a little basic diesel hatchback, then pop back in your R8 and tell me it feels slow. I think driving a car like this still feels special every time you take it out, but it is an experience that I think is also enhanced greatly with a little bit of delayed gratification. So my recommendation for the perfect driveway is a supercar and an old diesel Golf. And then I think you have truly the best of both worlds. Use the Golf when you want to, and use the supercar when you can. That is the way to do it. Anyway, that's enough from me. I hope you've enjoyed today's little video. Do you daily drive a supercar? Have you done it before? How did it go? Please let me know in the comments down below. Hit the subscribe button, and I will see you all for the next one. Bye-bye.